The power to create your reality is in your hands. With every thought and every word, you shape the world around you. This book, though of unknown authorship, is based on metaphysical principles inspired by the teachings of great spiritual masters like Connie Mendez, Saint Germain, and other great figures. These figures have demonstrated to us the transformative power that resides in our thoughts, words, and decrees, and how we can use them to manifest a full and conscious life. In the following pages, you will find a practical guide of decrees and affirmations that will invite you to connect with your inner power, and teachings that come not only from one source but from a body of universal spiritual knowledge, all focused on helping you awaken your capacity to create your own reality. A Strange Case of Applied Metaphysics. Author unknown. Prologue. Juana's Diary. This book you hold in your hands is more than just a simple story. It is Juana's diary, a name the unknown author has chosen to bring to life a profound journey of personal transformation. In these pages, you will find the intimate experiences of a woman who, through the teachings of Connie Mendez, discovers the true power of her mind and learns to apply the principles of metaphysics to shape her reality. What appears to be a simple personal account quickly becomes a life guide. Throughout Juana's story, you will see how she faces the doubts, fears, and obstacles we all know, but which she begins to overcome thanks to her practice of decrees and affirmations. These are not just empty words for Juana. They are powerful tools she uses to transform her thoughts and, with them, her life. Every decree she utters and every affirmation she adopts becomes a key to opening new doors on her path to a full and conscious life. The unknown author has left no proper name, but what they have left is a powerful testament to how the teachings of metaphysics, especially those of Connie Mendez, can change the life of anyone who applies them. Through Juana's diary, we see how words have a real impact on daily life, how thoughts can become realities, and how difficulties are nothing more than opportunities in disguise to grow and evolve. This book is not just a story to read. It is an invitation for you to immerse yourself in the practice of the principles Juana discovered throughout her journey. You will learn how to use decrees to attract abundance, peace, and well-being into your life. You will also see how she confronts her own inner demons and finds the strength to forgive herself and others, healing deep wounds and freeing herself from the burdens of the past. Through her process, you will witness how the practice of decrees, affirmations, and a change of mindset not only transforms her life but can transform yours too. This diary has, unintentionally, become a true guide for transformation. Although written in a personal and intimate way, Juana's diary is a practical manual for anyone who wishes to take control of their life by applying the same principles she used to change her destiny. Every word in these pages is designed to inspire you, motivate you, and above all, empower you to take the reins of your own life. At the end of this journey, you will not only know Juana's story but also have the necessary tools to begin writing your own. The teachings of Connie Mendez, reflected in Juana's life, are not mere concepts. They are practical guides that you can apply today to begin transforming your reality. What seems like a simple diary reveals itself as a powerful tool for change for all those who are ready to unlock their true potential. Chapter 1. The Silent Awakening. There was something about Juana that always made her feel different. Since childhood, while the world around her seemed to move at a frantic pace, she felt she walked deeper paths, invisible to others. Her mother spoke of life with a practical sense, but Juana always sought more. Nights were her companions, and in those moments of solitude, the whisper of the universe grew stronger. "What do I really want?" she often asked herself. "What is everyone looking for without knowing it?" There was something beyond the visible, and although she couldn't put it into words, she felt it deep within her being. It was an ordinary day, as she watched the sunset from her small window, when a new force bloomed within her. It wasn't a dramatic event. There were no grand revelations, just a clear and serene feeling. She had discovered that her true strength was not in what she did or what she said, but in what she felt. Over time, Juana began to understand something fundamental. Life was not an accident but a series of choices she made every day. Even in moments of doubt and confusion, she understood that every thought and every emotion she harbored shaped her reality, like a sculptor patiently giving form to their masterpiece. From a young age, she had heard about faith, but for Juana, faith was not just an abstract belief. It was something alive, something that had to be experienced firsthand. She knew she had to find her own path, far from pre-established formulas. She began to practice small meditations, to listen to that inner voice that had always been there but that she had ignored. Juana's life took a new direction when she understood that her faith was not a matter of waiting for something to change, but of changing herself first. Every thought, every decision became a conscious act of creation. Her mind opened to new possibilities, and what once seemed a chaotic world began to reveal itself as a reflection of her inner self. If everything I think and feel creates my reality, she told herself, then I must think big, dream big. Juana and the principle of dynamism. Juana remembered the first time she felt that impulse, that spark of life within her. She was in an empty church, a place that had always brought her calm. She sat on the wooden pew and looked at the altar in front of her. In the distance, a candle flickered, and at that instant, something changed. It wasn't the candle or the altar, it was something within her. It was as if her heart had connected with a force beyond the visible. Life is more than what I see, she told herself. Life is what I choose to see. That was Juana's first lesson. The power was in her, not in others, not in circumstances, but in her ability to choose, to transform every negative thought into a spark of light, every fear into an opportunity. Thus began her journey. It was not an easy path. There were moments of doubt, moments when the shadows seemed stronger than the light. But every time she stumbled, Juana rose with greater determination. She knew that the power she had discovered was not something acquired once and for all. It was a dynamic power, a power that required constant renewal, like a plant that needs water and light to grow. Juana understood that true Christianity was not a simple faith in the divine, but a daily experience of conscious creation. Every prayer she uttered, every word that came out of her lips, was a decree that shaped her reality. Juana's inner journey. Today I know I am not the same person as yesterday, Juana thought, recalling her first awakening. Every day I am a new version of myself, closer to what I truly am. Her life was a dance between chaos and order, between the known and the unknown, and in that dance, Juana discovered something essential. It was not about conquering darkness, but about accepting that she herself was both light and shadow. Only by embracing her duality could she find her true strength. Days passed, and with each one of them, Juana felt that the power residing within her grew stronger. She no longer sought answers in the outer world. She had learned that everything she needed was within her. Every act of faith, every moment of doubt, was part of her evolution. She learned to listen to the language of her soul, to follow her deepest intuitions, and to trust the process even when she didn't fully understand where it was leading her. Chapter 2. The Invisible Threads of Thought. There was a stillness in the air that morning. Juana, with a serene heart, gazed at the vast sky from her window. It wasn't the first time she had lost herself in her thoughts, but this time something was different. She felt as if her mind was weaving invisible threads that connected her reality to something larger, something she didn't quite understand yet. How is it that everything I think seems to manifest in my life? She wondered as she watched the tree leaves dance to the rhythm of the wind. It was a strange, almost magical feeling, as if suddenly the world she had always believed to be solid and external was beginning to respond to the subtleties of her mind. The awakening of consciousness. Juana's thoughts were like tiny seeds cast to the wind. Sometimes they germinated into actions. Other times, they lay dormant, waiting for the right moment to blossom. Over time, she realized it wasn't a coincidence. Every emotion, every idea had a life of its own, and her mind was the fertile ground where they grew. Thought creates, she repeated over and over, like a silent mantra. And with that, she began to observe her thoughts more carefully. She no longer let them pass unnoticed, like mere shadows crossing her mind without leaving a trace. Now she knew she had to treat them for what they were, the architects of her destiny. Each thought was a spark that could ignite a fire or simply fade into oblivion. And Juana, in her awakening process, understood that she had to learn to direct that fire, to use it with intention. The dance of thoughts. Juana remembered the first time she consciously felt the power of her thoughts. She was in her study, surrounded by books and papers, searching for answers outside herself. But at that moment, as if an inner whisper called her, she paused, closed her eyes, and in the silence of her mind, began to listen to what she had previously ignored. Every thought you have is a reflection of what you are, that inner voice told her. But it is also a tool. You decide how to use it. She realized that for years she had allowed her thoughts to flow uncontrollably, creating a life she sometimes didn't fully understand or accept. Now she felt the impulse to transform that dynamic. She would no longer be a victim of her ideas, but the author of her reality. Thinking isn't just letting ideas come and go, she mused. It's an art, and like all art, it requires practice, patience, and above all, awareness. She began to notice how some thoughts repeated themselves almost as if they had a life of their own. They were like familiar melodies, but some of them dissonant, laden with fear or doubt. Juana understood that she had to rewrite those melodies, create a new mental symphony, one that resonated with her inner truth. Juana's inner dialogue. "Sometimes I feel imprisoned by my own thoughts," she confessed to herself one afternoon, observing her reflection in an antique mirror. "It's as if a part of me has gotten used to thinking in a certain way, to clinging to beliefs that no longer serve me." At that moment, Juana remembered something she had once heard: "We are not what we think, but what we think shapes us." That phrase resonated within her with renewed force. "So, if I want to change my life, I must first change my way of thinking," she said with conviction. She began to pay attention not only to the thoughts that arose in her mind, but also to how she felt them. She discovered that behind every thought there was an emotion, a subtle impulse that guided it. And it was there that she decided to begin her transformation. The mechanics of thoughts. Days passed, and Juana immersed herself more and more in the art of thinking. She sat in silence each morning, breathing deeply, and watched as her mind filled with images, words, sensations. Some thoughts were luminous, full of hope and love; others were dark, laden with fear and doubt. But instead of rejecting them, Juana decided to embrace them all. "Every thought has its reason for being," she repeated to herself. "Even those that seem negative teach me something about myself." Over time, Juana learned not to completely identify with her thoughts. She understood that not all of them were true, that many were simple reflections of past beliefs, of inherited fears. She began to discern between those thoughts that empowered her and those that limited her. "My mind is like a garden," she told herself one day while watering the plants in her patio. "If I want the right flowers to bloom, I must be careful about what I plant." And so, Juana began to consciously plant thoughts of love, of abundance, of trust. Every time a negative thought appeared, she observed it without judgment, acknowledged it, and then let it go, replacing it with one that reflected her highest truth. The guiding voice. As Juana perfected the art of thinking, she began to notice a profound change in her life. Situations that once worried her no longer seemed so overwhelming. Relationships that once seemed tense began to flow with greater harmony. It was as if the universe, like her thoughts, responded to her new vibration. "My thoughts not only shape my inner reality," Juana thought, "they also influence the world around me." Each day, her practice became more subtle, more refined. It was no longer just about thinking positively, but about thinking with intention, about aligning her mind with her heart. She understood that true power was not in forcing her thoughts to be one way or another, but in allowing them to flow from her purest center. The art of transforming the mind. "Today I understand that thinking is a sacred act," Juana reflected one afternoon as the sun set behind the mountains. "It is the most powerful tool I have to create my life." With every conscious thought, Juana felt she was weaving a new destiny. She was no longer the same person who had begun this journey. Now her mind was aligned with her spirit, and that balance was reflected in everything she did. She knew that the art of thinking had no end. It was a continuous process, a daily practice. But with each step, Juana felt she was drawing closer to her true essence, to that place within her where thought and being united in a perfect dance. Chapter 3. The Secret Formula to Transform Your Life. Juana walked through her garden on a summer morning. The flowers swayed gently in the wind, and the scent of jasmine filled the air. The world seemed to be in perfect harmony, but inside her, a question tirelessly churned: "How can I change my life once and for all?" It was a concern that had grown silently over the years. Juana felt she had knocked on doors, explored paths, but the real answer, the key that would unlock her transformation, always seemed out of reach. She had read, she had heard, she had practiced techniques, but she felt something was missing, something deeper than mere words or rituals, something that, if she could grasp it, would change everything. "What if the answer has always been within me?" she wondered as a butterfly fluttered near her, almost as a symbol of what she yearned for: metamorphosis, the profound change that would set her free. The first step: recognizing the power of words. Juana remembered the first time she had heard about decrees and affirmations. They sounded like magic to her, as if by repeating certain phrases, her life could transform overnight. But over time, she understood that it wasn't just a matter of saying words. Words without the weight of feeling were like dry leaves blown by the wind. It wasn't enough to say, "I am abundant," or "I am at peace." The words had to be born from a deeper place, a place of certainty, a place where the heart and mind united in a single pulse. "Every word is a seed," she often told herself, "but it will only blossom if I plant it with faith and water it with intention." The search for the formula. The sun was high when Juana decided it was time to turn her life around. She knew she couldn't keep waiting for circumstances to change on their own. She had come to the conclusion that everything around her was a reflection of her inner self, an unconscious creation of the thoughts and emotions she harbored deep within her being. That afternoon, she sat by the lake at the end of the garden. The water reflected her image, but what she saw was not her physical reflection, but something more, a woman searching for answers, a woman willing to discover the secret that would change her life forever. "There's a formula," she thought, watching the ripples in the water. "A formula I've been ignoring, a formula that isn't just about repeating words, but about changing from the deepest part of my being." The power of the decree. Juana recalled the teachings she had read about decrees. Decrees were not simple prayers or empty affirmations. They were firm declarations of what one wished to see manifested in their life. They were the verbalization of the creative power we all possess, but which we often leave dormant. "Everything you decree with faith and conviction will manifest in your life," she repeated to herself. But it wasn't just a matter of speaking with conviction. Juana understood that behind every decree there had to be an inner certainty, a deep feeling of truth. If she decreed something, she had to feel it as real, as if it had already happened. Only then would the universe respond. That afternoon, in front of the lake, Juana closed her eyes and began to decree. She felt that every word that came out of her lips was like a seed planted in the fertile ground of her subconscious. With each word, she felt the barriers that had limited her begin to dissolve. "I decree that my life is full of abundance, love, and peace," she said softly, but with a firmness that resonated in her heart. "I decree that every step I take brings me closer to my highest purpose. I decree that everything I need is within me and is already manifesting in my life." The secret lies in the feeling. However, something inside Juana told her that just saying it wasn't enough. The true power wasn't just in the words, but in the feeling behind them. Words without emotion were hollow, empty. If she wanted to transform her life, she had to feel each decree as an imminent reality, as something that already existed in her world, even if she couldn't yet see it. "If I want to transform my life," she thought, "I must feel the change before I see it. I must vibrate with the reality I want to create." And then she understood. The true secret formula was not only in the words she uttered but in the emotional state that accompanied those words. If she decreed love, she had to feel that love flowing through every cell of her body. If she decreed abundance, she had to feel the gratitude of that abundance even before seeing it materialized. Juana began to practice this every day. She would wake up each morning, and before saying a word, she would close her eyes and connect with her emotions. She felt the joy, the peace, the gratitude, as if she were already living the life of her dreams. Then, when she spoke her decrees, she felt that they were already a reality within her. The change begins to manifest. As the days passed, Juana began to notice small changes. They weren't grand miracles overnight, but small signs that indicated her life was taking a new direction. The people around her began to reflect her new vibration. Opportunities that once seemed distant now presented themselves unexpectedly. Juana understood that transformation was not a one-time event but a continuous process, a path walked step by step, decree by decree. One afternoon, as she watched the sky tinged orange by the sunset, Juana smiled. She realized that the secret formula wasn't so secret after all. It had been there all along, waiting for her. It wasn't a complicated technique or a mystical ritual. It was simple, so simple that sometimes she had overlooked it. Thinking, feeling, and decreeing from the heart, that was all. That was the formula that would transform her life. Juana's new dawn. The days continued to pass, but now Juana lived them with a new awareness. She was no longer the woman she used to be. She woke up each morning knowing that the power to transform her life was in her hands, in her thoughts, in her words, in her emotions. And as she walked through the same garden where she had so often searched for answers, she realized something. Life hadn't changed on its own. She had changed, and with that change, the whole world around her had begun to transform. Juana had found her secret formula, and although she knew her journey was far from over, she felt a profound peace knowing that with every step she took, she was creating the life she had always dreamed of. Chapter 4. The Echo of Words. Juana sat on the small balcony of her house, surrounded by the fresh scent of dawn. The wind caressed her face, and at that moment, she felt a special connection with the world around her. She had always believed in the power of her thoughts, but that morning she understood that her words also carried something much greater. They were the echo of her soul, the projection of her deepest self, and every time she spoke, she created something in the world. "Everything I say carries weight," she told herself as she watched the rising sun tint the sky with warm colors. "My words are like seeds falling on the fertile ground of reality. Each one has the potential to grow, to come alive, and to manifest." That day, something within Juana awakened. She knew she couldn't keep speaking at random, repeating phrases she had heard without truly feeling them. If words could shape her life, then she had to speak with more awareness, with more intention. The first lessons of the power of the word. Juana clearly remembered the first times she had experienced the power of her words. It was in her childhood, when, without realizing it, she made a comment about something she desired. Days later, what she had mentioned had materialized, as if the universe had been listening to every syllable she uttered. But it was only over time, when facing the challenges of adult life, that she began to understand the true scope of that power. How many times had she said in moments of frustration, "I can't do this," and in doing so, felt that inability settle into her reality? How many times had she feared the worst, and by verbalizing those fears, seen them take shape before her eyes? Juana and the revelation of decrees. One day, while reading in her favorite corner, she found a phrase that would change her life. "By your words you will be condemned, and by your words you will be justified." These words resonated deep within her. It wasn't the first time she had read them, but at that moment they took on new meaning. Juana understood that every word she uttered was a decree, an intention launched into the universe. If she spoke with fear, her life would reflect that fear. If she spoke with confidence, life would return that certainty to her. It was a perfect cycle of cause and effect. She decided then to be more careful with what she said. She would no longer let her fleeting emotions direct her speech. "My words shape my world," she repeated to herself as a constant reminder. "What I say, I create, and what I create, I live." The power of silence before the decree. One afternoon, while walking in the park, Juana noticed something curious. She had spent the entire day without uttering a single negative word. Instead of saying, "I'm exhausted," or "this is impossible," she had remained silent when those emotions arose. And what she experienced was a strange peace, as if the silence gave her space to reflect before speaking. She then understood that words should not be spoken without thought. Every time she opened her mouth, she was planting something in the ground of life, and as a good gardener of her own existence, she had to choose well what seeds she wanted to plant. "Silence is my ally," Juana thought, "because in it I can discern before I decree. It is not necessary to fill the air with empty words." From that moment on, Juana began to practice the art of conscious silence. Before speaking, she would breathe deeply, connect with what she truly wanted to express, and only then let the words flow from within her. The moment to transform reality with decrees. Days passed, and Juana felt more in control of her life than ever before. Now that she understood the power of her words, she could see how her reality changed according to what she decreed. She was no longer a victim of her circumstances. She had learned to be the conscious creator of her own destiny. "I declare that my life is in balance," she told herself every morning upon waking. "I declare that every day I get closer to my dreams. I declare that everything I need is already on its way to me." She did it calmly, but also with a deep conviction. These were no longer mere desires. They were heartfelt affirmations, full of strength. Juana had ceased to be a spectator in her own life and had become the author of her destiny. The inner voice guiding decrees. "Today is a new day," Juana thought as she walked through her house, breathing in the fresh morning air. "A new day to decree what I wish to see in my world." She stopped in front of the mirror and looked herself in the eyes. "I decree that everything I do is full of purpose and clarity," she said softly, but with the certainty of one who knows the power of her words. "I decree that my path is illuminated and that abundance flows to me in all its forms." The reflection in the mirror returned an image different from that of previous days. It wasn't just her physical appearance that had changed, it was her energy, her presence. Juana looked more serene, more empowered. It was as if every decree she had uttered over time had begun to sculpt a new version of herself. The challenge of words in times of difficulty. Not everything was easy on Juana's path. There were days when, despite her decrees, reality seemed to challenge her, moments when doubts returned and fear wanted to settle back into her life. But every time this happened, Juana remembered an important lesson. Words have power, even when we cannot see their immediate effect. In those moments of difficulty, instead of giving in to the temptation to speak from fear or frustration, Juana clung to her decrees with more strength. She knew that even if current circumstances did not reflect what she desired, her words were working in the background, weaving a new reality that would soon manifest. No matter what I see now, she told herself, my word is stronger than any circumstance. Faith as part of the soul. Over time, Juana came to understand that faith was a fundamental part of her being. It wasn't something that could be turned off or on depending on circumstances. It was like a seed that had always been within her, waiting to be watered with confidence and certainty. Faith is my direct connection to the divine, she thought one day as she watched the stars begin to shine in the night sky. It is the part of me that always knows, even when my mind doubts. And it was then that everything made sense. Faith worked because it was the purest expression of her inner self. It was the way her soul communicated with the universe, sending signals of what it already knew to be true. The transformative power of faith. Now, every time Juana faced a challenge, instead of succumbing to fear or doubt, she clung to faith. She knew that even if things weren't always as she desired at the moment, the power of her faith was constantly working in the background, creating, bringing into her life everything her heart longed for. Faith is the force that moves everything, Juana thought. It is the energy that connects the visible with the invisible, the bridge between what I am and what I can be. With that certainty, Juana continued walking through life, knowing that faith was not only a tool to overcome challenges but the creative power that transformed her reality at every step. Chapter 6. The Bosom of Love That Sustains All. There was something in the stillness of that afternoon that resonated deeply in Juana's heart. The sky was tinged with a soft pink, and the world seemed to suspend itself in an infinite sigh. Sitting in her garden, hands resting on her knees, Juana reflected on a truth she had discovered in the deepest corners of her being. Love was the force that sustained everything. True love is not simply a fleeting feeling, she thought. It is an energy that moves every particle of the universe. For a long time, Juana had believed that love was something given and received, something that depended on others. But now, in the serenity of her own awakening, she understood that love had no boundaries or conditions. It was a constant flow that emanated from the center of every being and extended beyond what the eyes could see. The discovery of love as balance. Juana remembered the moments when she had felt love as an overflowing torrent, like a wave that swept her away. They were fleeting, intense moments that filled her heart with warmth. However, over time she realized that the love that truly sustained the universe was not that fleeting emotion, but something more subtle and constant, a pulse that beat gently in everything. True love, she told herself, is the balance that harmonizes all forces. It was not the love that sought to be reciprocated, nor the one that demanded something in return. It was a love that simply was, that existed in every corner of the cosmos, like a breeze that caresses everything without asking permission. Juana understood that love was what kept the stars in place, what made the trees grow towards the sky, what made hearts beat in unison in the silence of the night. The journey to self-love. To understand the love that moves the universe, I first have to find it within myself, Juana thought as she closed her eyes and immersed herself in the stillness of her being. For a long time, she had believed that love had to come from outside, that she needed to be validated by others to be real. But now she understood that everything started from within her. It was as if her heart had awakened from a long dream. Juana felt that love, true love, beginning to blossom in her chest, not because someone had brought it, but because it had always been there, waiting to be discovered. It was not a selfish love, but one that embraced all that she was, with her lights and shadows. The balance of true love is not about perfection, she thought, but about acceptance. Accepting everything I am and everything I am not, and loving it anyway. That discovery was liberating for Juana. She no longer sought love in the eyes of others, but found it in every breath, in every beat of her heart. It was as if the entire universe whispered to her that love was not something to be sought, it was something to be. Love as a creative force. Over time, Juana began to notice something extraordinary. The more she connected with that inner love, the more her reality began to change. Relationships that once seemed complicated now flowed with greater ease. The people who entered her life brought with them a different, more harmonious energy. It was as if the love emanating from within her began to attract everything that was in tune with her new vibration. Juana then understood that love was not only an emotion but a creative force. Like faith, love had the power to transform the world, but not through effort or struggle, but through the simple act of being. True love doesn't need to do anything, she reflected as she watched the stars on a clear night. It just needs to exist. And when it exists in its purest form, everything around it aligns. The balance between giving and receiving. There was something else Juana was beginning to understand about love, its balance. For years she had believed that loving meant giving without reservation, sacrificing for others. But now, with this new understanding, she saw love from a different perspective. Giving was only one part of the equation. The true balance of love resided in the ability to give and receive in equal measure. The universe sustains nothing out of balance, Juana thought. If I give without receiving, or receive without giving, I am interrupting the natural flow of love. So she began to practice this balance in her daily life. When she gave, she did so from a place of fullness, not from the need to be recognized or rewarded. And when she received, she did so with gratitude, without feeling that she had to immediately return what she had received. Over time, this natural flow of love began to feel like a dance, a subtle and harmonious dance in which every movement was in perfect synchronicity with the heartbeat of the universe. Juana and the truth of universal love. One day, while walking in the countryside, Juana stopped to observe a wild flower growing by the side of the road. It was small, insignificant in the eyes of many, but at that moment, Juana saw something more. She saw how that small flower, in its simplicity, was a reflection of the love that moved the universe. Even the smallest flower is here out of love, she thought with a smile. Everything that exists is a manifestation of love in balance. That afternoon, Juana felt how the love she had discovered within her was the same love that sustained every corner of the cosmos. There was no separation between her love and the love of the universe. They were one and the same. From then on, every step she took, every word she uttered, she did so from that place of love. She no longer saw life as a series of disconnected events, but as a continuous flow of loving energy that sustained her in every moment. The legacy of true love. Now, every time Juana looked at the world around her, she saw love in everything, in the wind caressing the trees, in the laughter of children playing in the park, in the silence of the night. She knew that true love was not something that could be explained with words, but it was something that could be felt deep within one's being. Love is what gives meaning to everything, she thought as she walked through her garden. It is what moves the universe and what keeps us in balance. Juana had found in true love the strength she had sought for so long, and she understood that in the end, everything returned to love, because love was not only the beginning and the end of all things, but also the thread that united every instant of her life. Chapter 7. The Silent Weight of Resentment. There was a heavy feeling in the air that afternoon. Juana, in her usual garden corner, felt uneasy, as if a shadow had followed her for years without her realizing it. It was a familiar sensation, but until now, she hadn't found the courage to face it head-on. Resentment, that slow poison, had subtly settled into her life, feeding on small wounds, broken promises, unsaid words. How can something so small grow so large within me? Juana wondered. She wasn't a person who carried visible grudges, but deep within her, she knew that these wounds, though hidden, had left scars that now weighed heavily on her. That day, sitting among the flowers, she knew she had to confront it, that the path to inner peace began with releasing everything she had held on to for so long. The birth of resentment. Juana remembered how it all began. It wasn't a single event, but an accumulation of small injustices, moments when she felt the world didn't give her what she deserved. They were everyday situations, truncated conversations, unfulfilled expectations. But like a drop of water constantly falling on a rock, resentment slowly eroded her soul, leaving deep marks that she herself ignored. Those people don't even know they hurt me, she thought, and here I am, carrying this pain. She felt that somehow she had allowed those wounds to shape her way of seeing the world, making her more distrustful, more closed off. The decision to let go. But that day, something changed in Juana. She realized that clinging to resentment was like holding a burning coal with the hope that someone else would get burned. The only harm this does is to myself, she thought with new clarity. She knew that to move towards the inner peace she so longed for, she had to let go. But how do you let go of something that has been inside you for so long? She wondered as she watched the sunset paint the sky with warm colors. It wasn't about forgetting, because forgetting doesn't heal. It was about releasing, about finding a way to let go without things needing to be repaired. The path to liberation. That night, Juana made a decision. She would face her resentment once and for all. But she wouldn't do it violently, or by seeking culprits. She knew that the peace she sought would not come from the outside world, but from a profound change within herself. She closed her eyes and, in the stillness of her room, began to recall every moment when she had felt that wound open. I don't do it to relive the pain, she thought. I do it to release it. One by one, the faces, situations, and words that had left their mark on her heart appeared in her mind. And with each one of them, Juana did something she had never done before. She forgave them. But it wasn't a superficial forgiveness. It wasn't forgiveness for others. It was forgiveness for herself. She released them, not for them, but for her, because she deserved to be free. The inner battle. It was not an easy process. As Juana advanced on this path of liberation, she encountered resistance within herself. There was a part of her that did not want to let go, that clung to the idea that resentment protected her, that somehow that pain made her stronger. But she soon understood that this kind of strength was nothing more than an illusion. Resentment doesn't protect me, Juana reflected. It imprisons me. She understood that by clinging to resentment, she was blocking the entry of new experiences, of new opportunities to love and be loved. She was closing the doors of her heart for fear of being hurt again, but in doing so, she was also depriving herself of living fully. Liberation and peace. With each passing day, Juana felt the weight of resentment begin to diminish. It wasn't a quick process, but it was constant, and one day, upon waking, she felt something different. There was space in her heart, a space that had once been occupied by pain but was now free. It was as if by releasing those emotions, she had created a void, but not a void that made her feel alone, but a void that filled her with peace. Peace does not come from not having been hurt, she thought as she walked through the park. It comes from not clinging to the pain. Juana understood that by letting go of resentment, she was opening the door to a new way of life, a life in which she did not need things to be perfect, in which she did not need to control the actions of others, because she knew that true peace could only come from within her. The law of polarity. Everything has its opposite. There were moments in Juana's life when she felt she was at the top, and others when she found herself in the depths of pain. It was then that she understood another of the universal laws, the law of polarity. This law stated that everything had its opposite, that there could be no light without darkness, no joy without sadness. Every experience, whether good or bad, has its latent opposite, Juana reflected as she watched the day turn into night. She knew that when she was in the midst of an emotional storm, peace was also present, only at a different frequency. Understanding this law helped her not to resist difficult moments, knowing that in every challenge there was also the seed of its solution. Everything is a cycle, she thought, and when I accept both polarities, I find balance. The law of rhythm. Everything has its time. Juana also came to understand the law of rhythm, which taught her that everything in life had its own time. The ups and downs of life, the cycles of growth and rest, all followed a natural rhythm that could not be forced. There were moments when she wanted to accelerate her evolution, when she wished things would change quickly. But by understanding this law, she realized that everything had its own process. I cannot force what is not yet ready to blossom, she thought as she watched the flowers in her garden grow patiently, following their own rhythm. The balance of laws. As Juana deepened her study and experience of these universal laws, she began to notice how they intertwined. No law operated in isolation. They all worked in harmony, creating the perfect balance that sustained creation. Everything is in its place, she thought, feeling the peace of this understanding. The universe makes no mistakes. Every law is designed to maintain balance and harmony in all that exists. And with that certainty, Juana felt that she no longer needed to control every detail of her life. The laws that governed the universe were always present, and if she learned to live in tune with them, everything she sought would arrive at the perfect moment in the most natural way. The legacy of universal principles. From that day on, Juana lived with a new awareness. She understood that her life was not the result of chance, but the consequence of the universal laws that were always at play. Every thought, every emotion, every action had a purpose and a consequence. The laws of the universe cannot be broken, she thought as she gazed at the vast starry sky, but I can learn to flow with them, to use their power to create a fuller and more harmonious life. Juana had found in universal principles the key to understanding not only the functioning of the universe but also her own place within it. Now she walked with confidence, knowing that everything was interconnected and that every step she took was sustained by the invisible laws that govern creation. Chapter 9. The Bridge Between the Invisible and the Visible. Juana stood by the window of her study, watching the golden rays of the sun stream through the half-open curtains, painting the landscape with a soft, enveloping light. For years, she had felt her life move like a dance between the material and the spiritual, between what she could see and touch and what she could only feel deep within her being. She had read about metaphysics, studied the principles, but until now she hadn't fully understood how this knowledge could be applied to daily life, how she could use it to live better. Knowledge is only useful when you apply it, she thought as she closed her eyes, trying to connect with that inner truth that had always guided her steps. She knew that metaphysics, that branch of knowledge dealing with the invisible, with the laws that govern the universe, was the key to transforming her life. But how could she bring those abstract principles into her everyday life? How could she make what she understood in her mind tangible in her experience? The first step: recognizing the power of thought. Juana had often heard that everything began with thought, that what she thought and believed shaped her reality. But it hadn't always been easy to put into practice. Days were full of challenges, and often her thoughts seemed to be out of her control, like clouds passing quickly across the sky. But little by little, she began to notice a pattern. Every time she consciously chose to think in positive terms, her reality softened, and circumstances that once seemed unmovable began to change. "My thoughts are the seed of my life," she reflected one morning while preparing her tea. "If I want a different harvest, I have to plant different seeds." It was at that moment that Juana decided to apply metaphysics to her life consciously. She knew it wasn't just about repeating affirmations or maintaining a positive attitude superficially. She had to go further, to understand that every thought was a vibration she sent to the universe, and that the universe, in its infinite precision, always responded to that vibration. The art of visualization. One of the first principles Juana began to apply in her daily life was that of visualization. She knew that imagining what she desired with all its details and emotions was a way to communicate her intentions to the universe. However, it wasn't just about superficially imagining. It was necessary to feel that what she visualized was already a reality in her life. The universe doesn't just respond to what I want, Juana thought. It responds to what I am inside. At night, before going to sleep, she would sit in her favorite corner, close her eyes, and begin to visualize how she wanted her life to be. She didn't do it with anxiety, but with gratitude, as if everything she desired were already happening. And with each visualization session, Juana felt something inside her change. It wasn't just a mental practice, it was a profound transformation in her energy. Applying knowledge to relationships. One aspect of Juana's life that had always been a challenge was her relationships with others. She knew that metaphysics was not just about transforming her own life, but also about how she connected with those around her. She understood that relationships were mirrors, that what she saw in others was nothing more than a reflection of what she carried within herself. If I want to improve my relationships, Juana thought, I have to start by improving my relationship with myself. So every time she experienced a conflict or discomfort in her relationships, instead of reacting impulsively, Juana would pause and ask herself, what part of me is being projected in this situation? What do I need to heal within myself for this to change? Over time, she noticed that her relationships began to flow with more harmony. People who once seemed distant now approached with a different energy, and those who brought conflict into her life slowly moved away. Juana didn't need to force anything. She simply aligned her inner self with the love and peace she wished to see reflected in others. The law of abundance. One of the biggest challenges Juana faced was her relationship with abundance. For years she had lived with the belief that abundance was difficult to achieve, something that only came with effort and sacrifice. But as she delved deeper into metaphysics, she began to understand that true abundance was not something external, but an energy that flowed constantly in the universe, ready to be received by those who were aligned with it. Abundance is already here, she repeated to herself every morning upon waking. I just have to open myself to receive it. Juana began to apply this principle practically. Instead of focusing on what she lacked, she began to be grateful for everything she already had, however small. Every time a thought of scarcity arose, she replaced it with one of gratitude, and little by little, her life began to change. Opportunities that once seemed inaccessible now came to her naturally, effortlessly. The power of the spoken word. Juana also understood the importance of words. She knew that words were decrees that shaped her reality, so she began to be more conscious of what she said, both aloud and in her inner dialogue. She stopped talking about her problems and started talking about solutions. She stopped saying, "I can't," and replaced it with, "I am in the process of doing it." Every word she uttered was loaded with intention, and that intention vibrated in the universe, creating the life she desired. Juana knew that it wasn't about ignoring challenges, but about approaching them from a place of power, of knowing that the words she used had the power to transform her reality. Visible change. As time passed, Juana began to notice tangible changes in her life. They weren't just small adjustments but profound transformations that resonated in every aspect of her existence. Circumstances that once overwhelmed her now seemed to resolve themselves. Relationships that were once conflictive now flowed harmoniously, and opportunities that once seemed unattainable now came to her naturally. Metaphysics is not just knowledge, Juana thought one afternoon as she watched the sunset. It is a way of life. It is applying the invisible to the visible. It is transforming the subtle into the tangible. And with that understanding, Juana continued to apply the knowledge she had acquired, knowing that the power of metaphysics was not just in understanding it, but in living it. Living in alignment with universal laws. Every day that passed, Juana felt more connected to the universal laws she had learned. It was not just a theory, it was a daily practice, a way of living in tune with the natural flow of the universe. She learned to trust that the knowledge she had acquired over the years was not something distant or mystical, but a practical tool to transform her life. True wisdom lies in applying what we know, Juana thought, and every day, with every thought, with every word, and with every action, she applied that knowledge, knowing that in that application resided the power to live better. Chapter 10. The Shadow of Fear and the Light of Good. Night had fallen silently, enveloping the world in an unsettling calm. Juana sat by the window, observing the stars in the dark sky. She knew that, like the universe, her life was full of mysteries, some she had explored and others that still paralyzed her. Among those mysteries, fear was the oldest, the most persistent, and one she had learned to disguise in 1,000 forms. Fear has always been my silent companion, Juana thought. Always there, waiting for the moment to take hold of my mind. Throughout her life, Juana had learned to cope with fear, to live with it, but now she felt the time had come to truly face it. She knew that behind that fear, behind every shadow that fed it, there was a greater truth, the trust in good, that inner certainty that in her darkest moments seemed to vanish, was the only light capable of dissolving any fear. The origin of fear. Juana reflected on how fear had settled into her life very early on. It wasn't a specific fear, it wasn't just the fear of the unknown or of what might go wrong. It was a deeper fear, rooted in the belief that somehow, good did not always prevail, that life, in its complexity, could be unfair, that what she feared could be more real than what she longed for. Why is it so easy to believe in evil? She wondered. Why does fear have more strength in my mind than the confidence that everything is good? She knew that fear fed on what she didn't understand, on doubts, on unhealed wounds. But she also knew, deep within her being, that fear was not the truth, that behind every fear there was a greater possibility, an opportunity to trust in good beyond fear. The leap towards trust. One morning, as she walked through the park, Juana felt something different. It wasn't that fear had completely disappeared, but there was a new sensation, like a soft light beginning to break through the dark clouds. If fear is an illusion, she thought, why do I keep allowing it to direct my life? It was at that moment that she understood that the only way to overcome fear was to trust in something greater than it. It wasn't about fighting fear or ignoring it, but about overcoming it, about going through it with the certainty that on the other side was good, always waiting, always available. Good is a constant, Juana told herself. It is the force that sustains everything. Fear is just the shadow trying to hide it. Rebuilding trust. Rebuilding trust in good was not an immediate process for Juana. There were days when she felt that fear was taking hold of her thoughts again, that doubts about the future, about her decisions, enveloped her once more. But in those moments, instead of letting herself be carried away by the current of fear, she began to remind herself that trust was not an emotion but a choice. Every time fear appears, Juana thought, I have the opportunity to choose to trust. I can decide if I want to believe in good or in the illusion of evil. Juana began to observe her fears from a new perspective. She no longer saw them as enemies, but as teachers who showed her the areas of her life in which she had not yet fully learned to trust. Every fear was an invitation to rebuild her faith in good, to trust that the universe, though sometimes chaotic, always had a perfect order. The act of letting go. One of the most transformative moments for Juana was when she understood that to trust in good, she had to learn to let go of the need to control, to foresee every step, to anticipate results. Fear feeds on my need to have everything under control, she reflected as she watched the river water flow gently. But good flows effortlessly, it doesn't need me to guide it, it simply is. With that understanding, Juana began to let go, to allow things to be as they should be, without fighting against them. At first, it was difficult. She had spent so long trying to prevent her fears from coming true that letting go felt like jumping into a void. But little by little, seeing how life took its course, observing how situations resolved themselves in unexpected and perfect ways, Juana began to trust more and more in that flow. Good always finds its way, she thought, even when I don't see it immediately. Renewing faith in good. Over time, Juana's trust in good grew stronger than fear, not because fear disappeared completely, but because every time it appeared, she knew how to respond. Her faith in good was no longer a superficial belief but an inner certainty built through the experience of letting go and observing how, no matter how difficult a situation seemed, good always prevailed. Good is in everything, Juana repeated to herself every morning upon waking. Even if I don't see it, even if fear tries to cloud it, good is always present. This new perspective gave her a peace she had not experienced before. She no longer needed to be on constant alert. She no longer lived anticipating the worst. Her trust in good allowed her to live the present with more freedom, with more joy. Juana and the certainty of good. One afternoon, while walking on the beach, Juana stopped to observe the horizon. The waves came and went, like an eternal dance between earth and sea, and at that moment she felt a deep peace, a certainty that filled her being. Fear has accompanied me for so long, she thought, but now I know it has no real power. The true power is in my trust in good, in my ability to see the light even in the midst of darkness. From that day on, Juana lived with a new clarity. Every time fear tried to resurface, she recognized it, but she no longer gave it control. She knew that in the end, the only reality was good, that invisible force that sustained everything, that moved the threads of the universe with precision and love. The rebirth of trust. With every step she took, Juana felt her trust in good grow stronger and stronger. It was no longer a blind faith, but a trust based on experience, on the certainty that absolutely everything was guided by an invisible hand that always sought the greatest good for all. Fear can be strong, she thought, but good is more powerful. It always has been, and always will be. And so, with a heart full of trust and a spirit at peace, Juana continued her journey, knowing that beyond any fear, she could always trust in good. Chapter 11. The Awakening of a New Mind. The fresh morning air filled Juana's room as the first rays of sun streamed through the half-open curtains. Sitting in silence with her eyes closed, she felt something within her beginning to change. The time had come to leave behind old beliefs, those thoughts that had accompanied her for so long but which now felt like invisible chains limiting her growth. How can I transform my life if I keep thinking the same way? She wondered as she inhaled deeply. Juana knew that real change did not begin outside but within her. It was not enough to act differently. It was necessary to renew her mind, to reprogram her thoughts to align them with the life she wished to create. Personal transformation was not an event. It was a process, and every process had a beginning, the mind. The weight of old beliefs. For years, Juana had lived with a set of beliefs that, without realizing it, had shaped every aspect of her life. These were inherited beliefs, thoughts repeated over and over in her mind, that had created the circumstances she now wanted to change. I'm not enough, success is difficult to achieve, happiness is fleeting, were some of the ideas that had taken root in her mind. But those are not my truths, she repeated to herself again and again, as if by saying it she could shake off the weight that those ideas had imposed on her for so long. Juana began to understand that these beliefs were not hers. She had adopted them from society, from her environment, from the people around her. But now she knew she had the power to choose, to decide which thoughts she allowed to occupy her mind. She knew that personal transformation began with the renewal of those beliefs, with the conscious decision to think differently. The power of a new thought. One morning, while walking in a nearby park, Juana stopped to observe an old and robust tree. Its branches reached towards the sky with confidence, as if they knew no fear of breaking. And at that moment, she understood that her mind was like that tree. For years, she had been planting thoughts that had taken deep root, but now she had the opportunity to plant something new, something that would strengthen and uplift her. My thoughts are the seed of my reality, Juana thought as she caressed the rough trunk of the tree. If I want a new life, I must start by planting new seeds. From that day on, Juana began to observe every thought that crossed her mind. She did so not with criticism, but with curiosity. She knew that to change, she first had to understand what thoughts had been guiding her, which ones empowered her and which ones limited her. The renewal process. The change was not instantaneous. Juana faced moments when old thoughts tried to return, like ghosts from the past refusing to leave. But instead of fighting them, Juana decided to observe them with compassion. She knew that every limiting thought had served its purpose in her life, but now it was time to let them go. Every time I choose a new thought, I am renewing my mind, she told herself every morning upon waking. Every time I decide to think in terms of possibilities, I am transforming my life. The process of mental renewal was not linear. There were days when Juana felt she had made great progress, and others when it seemed that old patterns returned to take control. But little by little, with patience and determination, she began to notice the changes. She no longer reacted in the same way to situations that once overwhelmed her. The doubts that once paralyzed her, she now saw as opportunities to reaffirm her new way of thinking. Transformation in practice. Juana understood that true personal transformation was not just about changing the way she thought in the abstract. She had to apply that change to her daily life. She began with small acts. Every time a limiting thought crossed her mind, she replaced it with a more expansive one. If she used to think, "This is impossible," now she would ask herself, "How can I make this work?" Over time, this practice became part of her routine. She no longer needed to try so hard to change her way of thinking. New thoughts began to flow more naturally, as if her mind was reprogramming itself to see the good in every situation, to find solutions instead of problems. One afternoon, while working on a project that had previously caused her anxiety, she realized something amazing. She was no longer afraid. She felt a calm, a confidence she had never experienced before. She knew this was the fruit of her inner work, of the renewal of her mind. I have changed my way of thinking, Juana thought, and in doing so, my world has changed. The flourishing of a new life. With each passing day, Juana felt her mind expand. She no longer felt trapped by the limits that once defined her. The personal transformation she had initiated with small changes in her thinking now reflected in all areas of her life. Relationships that once seemed tense now flowed with more harmony. Challenges that once seemed overwhelming now she saw as opportunities to grow. My life is the reflection of my renewed mind, she thought with a smile as she walked through the park where she had so often reflected. What once seemed unattainable now feels possible. Juana had understood something profound. The mind is the starting point of all transformation. By renewing her way of thinking, she had renewed her entire life. She knew this process never ended, that there would always be more layers to discover, more beliefs to transform. But now she was ready for it. The mind as a tool for creation. The renewal of her mind had not only given Juana a new way of seeing the world, but also a new way of creating her reality. She knew that her thoughts were the most powerful tool she had to shape her future. Now, instead of letting her thoughts flow uncontrollably, she directed them with intention, like a painter carefully choosing each stroke. My thoughts create my life, Juana reminded herself every day, and I have the power to choose which thoughts I want to guide me. With this new mindset, Juana continued her journey, knowing that personal transformation was not a destination but a constant journey of renewal, and with each step she took, she felt her mind, her life, and her entire being flourish in harmony with the universe. Chapter 12. The Infinite Flow of Abundance. The gentle morning breeze caressed Juana's face as she walked slowly along the garden path. The tall, majestic trees seemed to whisper ancient truths to the rhythm of the wind. It was one of those days when the world felt balanced, but within Juana, there was a subtle murmur, a question that had accompanied her for years. Why does abundance seem so elusive? She had heard so many times that abundance was her divine right, that the universe was full of infinite possibilities, but she had not yet experienced the prosperity she heard so much about. There were moments when she felt life flowing generously, but then at other times, scarcity and limitations would knock on the door of her mind again. If abundance is real, why does it seem so hard to activate it in my life? She wondered as she sat on a bench, watching the flowers bloom around her. She knew the key was not outside, but within her. Abundance was not something to be achieved with effort, but something that had to be unlocked in her own consciousness. The rediscovery of abundance. Juana began to understand that abundance was not just a matter of money or material goods, it was much more. Abundance was a state of being, a vibration, a current that always flowed, but which she had unconsciously blocked for years. Abundance is like air, she thought, always here, waiting for me to breathe it, waiting for me to open myself to receive it. She recalled moments in her life when she had felt that everything she needed came to her naturally, effortlessly, not because she had done anything special, but because in those moments she was in tune with the natural flow of life. The key, she realized, was to maintain that state of openness, of gratitude, of trust that the universe always provided. The universe is abundant, she repeated to herself every day, trying to replace the old beliefs of scarcity that had rooted in her mind. She knew that to activate prosperity in her life, she first had to change her relationship with abundance. It was not about seeking outside, but about allowing the divine to flow through her. The act of receiving. One afternoon, as Juana prepared for her daily meditation, she understood something profound. She had spent most of her life asking, but she had never stopped to receive. She was so focused on what she didn't have that she had forgotten that true abundance begins with gratitude for what already exists. She realized that she had lived as if the universe were a limited place where she had to fight to get what she desired. I don't need to ask for more, she thought with a new clarity. I just need to open myself to receive. That night, before going to sleep, Juana did something different. Instead of asking for more abundance, she began to give thanks for everything she already had. She thanked for the small things that often went unnoticed, the warmth of her home, the food on her table, the people around her. And as she did so, she felt something inside her begin to change. It was as if by focusing on gratitude, she was unlocking a door within her heart that had been closed for so long. The natural flow of prosperity. As the days passed, Juana began to notice small changes in her life. They weren't sudden miracles, but there was a sense of fluidity that hadn't been there before. Opportunities that once seemed distant began to come to her in unexpected ways. It wasn't just money, but opportunities to expand, to learn, to connect with others. It was as if the universe had been waiting for her all this time, waiting for her to realize that abundance had always been available. Prosperity isn't just about having more, she reflected as she walked under the blue sky. It's about feeling that I am already enough, that I already have everything I need to be happy. Juana began to live her life with this new awareness. She no longer felt the need to fight for things. She knew that everything that belonged to her would come to her at the perfect time, and every time a thought of scarcity arose, she replaced it with a thought of gratitude. Over time, this became her new way of being, her new habit. Breaking the beliefs of scarcity. There was a moment, however, when Juana faced her greatest challenge, the beliefs of scarcity she had inherited throughout her life. These were not just thoughts, they were stories she had learned from her environment, from her past, that told her abundance was limited, that it wasn't always available to everyone. But now she knew that these beliefs were nothing more than illusions, echoes of a mindset that did not align with the truth of her being. Abundance is my divine right, she repeated to herself every morning upon waking, like a mantra that helped her remember who she truly was. And with each passing day, those old beliefs began to fade, replaced by the certainty that prosperity was not something she had to earn, but something that was already hers by right. Abundance in all its forms. Over time, Juana began to see abundance in a different way. She no longer saw it only as money or material resources, but as a flow that manifested in all aspects of her life. Abundance was in the nature around her, in the love of the people who supported her, in the creative ideas that arose in her mind, in the opportunities that appeared out of nowhere. Divine abundance has no limits, Juana thought as she watched a sunset on the horizon. It is a constant flow that I just need to allow. True prosperity, she realized, was not in what she could accumulate, but in what she could give and receive in balance. By opening herself to divine abundance, Juana had unlocked an infinite flow that not only sustained her but also connected her with others in a deeper way. The balance between giving and receiving. Juana also understood that to keep the flow of abundance active in her life, she had to learn to give as much as she received. She began to share what she had, not only materially, but also her time, her energy, her love for others. She realized that true prosperity was not just about having, but about sharing what she had received, allowing the flow of abundance to never stop. Abundance is a cycle, Juana thought, and it is only maintained when we give as much as we receive. Thus, with each act of generosity, she felt the universe respond in unexpected ways. The more she gave, the more she received, and the more she received, the more grateful she felt. Juana and the certainty of divine abundance. One afternoon, as Juana sat by a fountain, listening to the incessant sound of flowing water, she realized something profound. Abundance never stops. It always flows. It is always there, like the water from that fountain, ready to fill any glass offered to it. It is only a matter of being willing to receive. I have been blocking the flow, Juana thought with a quiet smile, but now I know that abundance is my natural state. I don't have to seek it outside. It has always been within me. With this certainty in her heart, Juana continued her journey, knowing that prosperity was not something that came and went, but an eternal current that sustained her, guided her, nourished her at every step of her life. Chapter 13. Letting Go of the Past to Live Again. The afternoon fell slowly, as if time itself had decided to stop at that moment. Juana, sitting in her old armchair by the window, watched the clouds change shape, like a reflection of the very inner process she was going through. She had reached a point in her life where the past, with its memories and wounds, constantly presented itself to her, like shadows that would not let her move forward. The past keeps weighing on me, Juana thought with a sigh. How many times have I tried to leave it behind? How many times have I promised to forgive, only to discover that the pain is still there, like a flame that never goes out? Forgiveness, that simple word so loaded with power, seemed so far from her reality. She knew it was the key to freeing herself, to releasing that weight she had carried for years, but she didn't know where to start. How does one truly forgive? She wondered again and again. Forgiveness was not just forgetting or overlooking the pain. It was something much deeper, an act of self-love. The wounds of the past. Juana had accumulated many wounds throughout her life. They weren't great betrayals or devastating moments, but small hurts that over time had become invisible scars. They were unfulfilled promises, sharp words that never disappeared, expectations that were never met. I have kept each of those wounds in my heart, Juana thought. I have carried them as if they were part of me, but I know they don't belong to me. The past followed her, not because she sought it, but because she had learned to cling to it. Juana knew that to free herself, she had to let go of those chains, release the resentments that had colored so many moments of her life. But forgiveness was not something that could be forced. It was not a simple act of will. It was a process, a journey that had to begin from the deepest part of her being. The moment to decide. One night, as Juana meditated under the soft glow of the moon, she felt a call within her. It's time, she told herself. It's time to forgive, to free myself once and for all. She didn't know where to start, but she understood that the first step was to face the pain head-on. She could no longer ignore the emotions she had buried for so long. She closed her eyes and, in the calm of her room, began to recall each of those moments that still hurt, one by one. She knew she couldn't keep running, that to forgive she first had to face everything she had avoided for so long. The process was painful at first. Each memory that emerged brought with it a wave of emotions: anger, sadness, frustration. But Juana did not back down. She knew that behind every tear that fell there was a possibility of healing, an opportunity to let go. Forgiveness as an act of liberation. Over time, Juana began to understand that forgiveness was not something she did for others, but for herself. It was not about justifying what had happened, nor about minimizing the pain she had felt. It was about no longer carrying the weight of those emotions, about freeing herself to be able to move forward. I forgive so that I can live, she repeated to herself every day upon waking. I forgive not because everything was good, but because I deserve to be at peace. Juana understood that by forgiving, she was not saying that what had happened didn't matter, but that she would no longer allow those memories to define her. Every time a thought of resentment tried to arise, she replaced it with a thought of compassion, both towards others and towards herself. Forgiveness towards oneself. Juana's greatest discovery was realizing that the most difficult forgiveness of all was not towards others, but towards herself. For years she had blamed herself for decisions she had made, for moments when she had not been strong enough, for having allowed pain to govern her for so long. "How can I forgive others if I don't forgive myself?" she thought as she looked at her reflection in the antique mirror. "I have been my harshest judge, my toughest critic." With this new understanding, Juana began to practice forgiveness towards her own being. She began to let go of the expectations she had carried, to accept that, like everyone, she was human, and that her mistakes did not define her. Every day, looking at herself in the mirror, she repeated words of love and acceptance, reminding herself that she deserved to be free, that she no longer had to carry the guilt. The transformative power of forgiveness. As time passed, Juana began to notice how the act of forgiving transformed her life in profound ways. Relationships that once seemed tense began to soften, and people who had once caused her pain now seemed distant, as if they were no longer part of her reality. Forgiveness doesn't change the past, Juana reflected, but it changes the present. It allows me to live without the weight of what I can no longer change. As she forgave, she felt her heart grow lighter, her mind clear. She was no longer trapped in the cycle of reliving the same pains over and over again. Forgiveness had opened a door to a new life, a life in which the past no longer had power over her. Juana and the freedom of forgiveness. One morning, while walking on the beach, Juana stopped to watch the waves gently breaking against the shore. She felt a deep peace, a tranquility she hadn't experienced in a long time. She knew that this was the result of the work she had done, of the forgiveness process she had begun months ago. "I have let go of the past," she thought with a smile on her lips. "I have forgiven others, and I have forgiven myself. And now, at last, I am free." Forgiveness had been her greatest act of self-love, a liberation that had allowed her to live the present more fully, without the invisible chains that bound her to pain. And as she continued on her way, Juana knew that even though the process of forgiveness was ongoing, she was no longer afraid to face it. She knew that by forgiving, she was not only freeing herself from the past, but also making space for a future full of possibilities. Chapter 14. The Sway of Life. The sound of the wind moved the tree branches as if each danced to the rhythm of an ancient tune, a rhythm that had existed since before Juana could remember. Sitting on her balcony, she watched the leaves come and go, carried by an invisible yet constant force. That sway, that coming and going, reminded her of something profound. Life, like the movement of a pendulum, oscillated between extremes, following a rhythm that seemed inevitable. Everything in life has its rhythm, Juana thought as she let her mind wander with the cadence of the wind. Everything moves between pleasure and pain, between light and shadow, between success and failure. Understanding that pendular movement, that invisible law that seemed to govern everything, had become one of the most profound teachings Juana had received. She knew that the key to navigating life was not to resist these cycles, but to learn to move with them, to flow with the natural rhythms that brought both joy and trials. She could not control the pendulum's swing, but she could learn to understand it. The pendulum cycles in her life. Juana began to recall moments in her life when she had felt the force of this law. The moments of greatest happiness always seemed to be followed by stages of challenge, and vice versa. She had experienced success only to then face difficulties that made her doubt herself. "Why does it seem that when I reach a high point, everything falls again?" she often wondered. But now she understood that it was not a matter of luck or destiny. It was the natural movement of the pendulum, oscillating from one side to the other, bringing with it the extremes of human experience. Everything that goes up must come down, and everything that goes down will go back up, she thought with new clarity. It's not about resisting, but about accepting that life is a constant cycle of ups and downs. The pendulum and the law of rhythm. It was one afternoon, while walking near a quiet lake, when Juana understood that this constant oscillation was not something to be feared. On the contrary, it was one of the most natural laws of the universe. Everything in creation followed a rhythm. Day and night, the seasons, the ebb and flow of the ocean, life itself with its changes and cycles, was guided by that universal rhythm. The law of the pendulum is nothing more than the reflection of nature itself, Juana told herself as she observed the gentle movement of the water. Nothing remains in one place forever. What is joy today may be sadness tomorrow, but that sadness will also give way to new joy. Juana realized that her attempts to cling to moments of happiness or avoid challenges had only led her to a constant struggle. Understanding the law of rhythm meant accepting that everything changed, that the pendulum would keep swinging no matter how much she tried to stop it. And that was okay, because in that oscillation, in that constant sway, lay the balance of life. The art of moving with the pendulum. Over time, Juana began to see her life differently. Instead of resisting change, she began to flow with it. She knew that difficult moments would not last forever, just as moments of success and peace were not permanent either. But in that acceptance, she found something she had not expected: serenity. If everything in life is a cycle, then I can stop fighting against it, she thought as she walked through her garden one morning. I can learn to move with the pendulum, to dance with its rhythm. This new perspective gave her peace. When the pendulum swung to the side of challenge, she no longer felt overwhelmed. She knew that eventually that same movement would lead her back to a place of calm. And when life led her to moments of joy, she enjoyed them without the constant fear of losing them, because she knew that life would take its natural course. Cycles in nature. One day, as Juana observed the nature around her, she began to see the reflection of the pendulum in everything. The seasons changed effortlessly. Trees lost their leaves in autumn only to be reborn in spring. The sun rose every morning and set every night in an endless but perfect cycle. Everything follows its course, Juana thought as she watched the garden flowers wither only to give way to new shoots. Nothing is lost, everything transforms, and I too am part of that cycle. This understanding gave her a profound sense of connection with the universe. She no longer saw difficult moments as punishments or trials she had to overcome. She saw them as part of a larger flow, a natural rhythm that was guiding her towards a greater understanding of herself and the world. Juana and balance amidst change. Over time, Juana learned to find balance amidst life's constant changes. She knew that although she could not control the pendulum, she could control how she responded to its movement, and in that response, in her ability to remain steadfast amidst the sway, she found her true strength. The pendulum will keep swinging, Juana thought as she watched the sunset, but I can choose how to navigate each movement. I can learn to balance amidst change, to accept each phase of life with gratitude. This new approach allowed her to live with more calm, with more acceptance. She knew that no matter where the pendulum swung, she had the power to maintain her inner peace. The dance with the law of the pendulum. One afternoon, while meditating by the river, Juana felt a deep connection with the law of the pendulum. She visualized her life as a dance where each swing of the pendulum was not a struggle but an invitation to move with grace. Life is not a series of chaotic events, she thought. It is a constant dance between light and darkness, between expansion and contraction. And with that certainty, Juana decided that instead of fearing the pendulum, she would embrace it. She would learn to move with it, to understand that each oscillation was an opportunity to grow, to learn, to evolve. The end of resistance. Now, when the pendulum of life led her to difficult moments, Juana saw them with new understanding. She no longer resisted. She no longer tried to cling to what was no longer there. She knew that everything in life had its time and its cycle, and that balance always returned, though not always in the way she expected. The law of the pendulum is inevitable, she told herself one night as the stars shone in the sky, but within me, I can find peace in the midst of its movement. And with that certainty, Juana continued her journey, knowing that life, with its rhythms and cycles, would always guide her to where she needed to be. Chapter 15. The Invisible Sculpture of Destiny. Dawn began to tint the sky with soft golden hues, and Juana, enveloped in the silence of her room, contemplated the first lights of the day. There was something powerful in that morning stillness, as if the entire universe were giving her the opportunity to start anew, to take the invisible chisel that life had given her and sculpt her own destiny. My life is my creation, Juana thought as she felt the fresh air enter through the window. Every choice, every thought, every action is a brushstroke on this infinite canvas that I call destiny. She had reached a point in her life where she understood that she was not a victim of circumstances but the architect of her reality. The power to create, to transform her life and her destiny, was in her hands, but it required something deeper than just desire. It required wisdom. The power of intention. Juana had always felt that her life moved like a dance between the material and the spiritual, between what she could see and touch and what she could only feel deep within her being. She had read about metaphysics, studied its principles, but until now she had not fully understood how this knowledge could be applied to everyday life, how she could use it to live better. Knowledge is only useful when you apply it, she thought as she closed her eyes, trying to connect with that inner truth that had always guided her steps. She knew that metaphysics, that branch of knowledge dealing with the invisible, with the laws that govern the universe, was the key to transforming her life. But how could she bring those abstract principles into her daily life? How could she make what she understood in her mind tangible in her experience?